we catch ourselves at the moment with a time of big consumer change, but no firm new economic model to underpin where we go next with media. It really is touching all sectors greatly at different points. It's a super interesting time if brands are willing to look about, understand, follow the economic models and be really curious and take some risks.
Hello and welcome to The Insight in 15. I'm Stuart Burt and today I'm joined by my colleague Nat Gross, who's head of KPMG's media practice, to talk about everything to do with media and content creation. Nat, welcome to the podcast.
Hi Stuart, thanks for having me.
Let's start with the big picture. We've seen a lot of change in the media landscape over the last couple of years, from the way that content is created through to how we consume that content. From your perspective, what are the biggest trends to watch out for right now?
So we try and look across, at trends, I guess, over the long term. And I think the ones that we really focus in on are content itself, as you just touched on, huge amount of change, both in terms of the producers. So streaming media, for example, I think now is in advance or have taken over traditional media in terms of amount of content produced. Influencers and that whole economy that sits around influencers, and now with AI and what we're starting to see with AI around the content shift and what that means. So content huge. The sort of pairing of that is audience. So the disintermediation of audience, where people are viewing, how they're viewing, what they're viewing, changes hugely, and we'll obviously dive into that, but that sort of goes hand in hand with lots of content, lots of different places to view it. And then technology, so we will talk around AI. So technology has obviously changed the industry massively over the last 20 plus years, everything from advertising at the top of the funnel through to streaming in terms of the platforms that are used to disseminate. But now increasingly with Gen AI and what's happened over the last sort of 24 months, a huge shift for people to really try and grapple with, and that touches the whole of the industry, touches all industries. And then sitting alongside that as well is trust and regulation. So what are we seeing in terms of things like online safety bill? What are we seeing in terms of new standards that are emerging to protect content, like really simple licensing models that publishers are backing at the moment? And then, of course, what we're seeing in terms of antitrust or competition.
And you mentioned there that some of them are media industry specific, but actually a lot of them are touching on almost every corner of the UK economy. Are there any sectors in particular that are at the sharp end of this change?
There are. Clearly the media sector is, in terms of how do people access and consume media, but also how do people produce media and produce content, and then how do we have the right economic model that sits around content. But at the very top of that funnel, in terms of what's happening with AI and search, for example, and the findability for brands through traditional means like search engine optimization, search engines, which have been pretty stable really for the last 20 years. That has been very disrupted in the last 18 to 24 months. So that's disrupting a brand that's trying to get found, that, you know, if it's a drink or some food or some clothes, et cetera, as much as it is how to consume media. So it really is touching all sectors greatly at different points. And as I say, that sort of audience funnel, if you like.
And how fast is the change right now compared to other periods?
The algorithms are updating every 6 months with new features, new capabilities, which impacts both production as well as dissemination, distribution. So I think that speed, I think people got caught out. And because consumers have adopted the economic model that has underpinned our industry for, as I say, a couple of decades, has started to really get disrupted as well, because people are not getting paid for find me on a certain reputable search engine, click through to my property, my brand site, whatever it is, and there's an economic model that underpins every part of that chain. That gets disrupted. What the new model is, there are schools of thought emerging, but the economic model that underpins it isn't there yet. And I think that has been the truth in history when we've looked at music licensing, the whole advent of the SEO, pay-per-click, display advertising industry. All of those things took time to mature, and we catch ourselves at the moment with a time of big consumer change, but no firm new economic model to underpin where we go next with media.
And we'll come on to the economic models in a moment, but also just to where you started on AI. Clearly, we've touched on it in this podcast before in terms of its impact on different sectors, but in terms of the media sector, what are the more immediate impacts that you're seeing on creatives effectively? Can AI be creative?
So the immediate effects are on, as you say, creating content. And that's everything from sourcing and producing content to how do you cut up content and how do you disseminate it in multi-language or in multi-format, etc., etc. So at that end of content editing, it's less contentious. Content origination is pretty contentious. And of course, AI can produce content, can produce actors, can produce whatever it is. So and so there is a whole school of sort of thought and a whole set of people looking at the moment of what is the right way to go about doing that, and how do you protect the integrity of the artist, and how do brands get seen, and how do you create brilliant media publications or brilliant media shows in this new world. So there's that whole piece. There's also how do we protect our IP? So who owns it? And we obviously saw the early origins of the LLMs really not having the licensing or the relationships or trust in place to crawl in the way that they crawled. That's changing, partly through through good new commercial models starting to emerge, through some more legislative action or lawsuit action. So that's changing somewhat, but that's still a huge area in terms of who owns copyright, and then how do we get paid? How do we get paid for our content that is being crawled, and what happens to content where you don't just want to be reliant on the LLMs?
Also, I guess the big elephant in the room is impact on jobs. And I guess if you were being asked by someone who's in the creative industries saying, look, if an advert can, if AI can be used to create an advert that not only writes the script of an advert, but also produces it and distributes it, what does that mean for my job? What would your response be?
So we are going to see change, but we also see the opportunity for, or the industry should be looking at the opportunity for branded content, for trust through different ways to produce content. And I think that's the big thing, is if we stand still and if we don't look to where the world is going, then there will be that impact on staff and teams, because that will be in part due to the vision and to the proactive moves that the parent organizations are making in terms of dealing with this shift.
And I guess the flip side of it is the kind of democratisation of content, whereby the barriers to creating content have been reduced. You don't have to be part of a big media organisation. You effectively just need a smartphone and internet access to create content, or dare I say it, create a podcast. What is the impact that is having on the sector?
So we're seeing, to my point on content, like a lot of content, so therefore a lot of competition for eyeballs. And so we can, a lot of people can start, but for every one that's successful, there'll be a lot that are broadcasting into the void, if you like. And therefore some of the economics and the business models around great content, i.e. the ability to find an audience, to find the right presenters, and do all those things still sort of are there. So there is that. But I think if you look, even if we just look at the enterprise value of things like Discord, things like TikTok, things like Insta, obviously that's part of Meta, they make traditional media pale in comparison. So if you look at a News Corp that's got NBC, that's got Universal Studios, that's got Peacock as a streaming platform, they're like worth like an eighth of like a TikTok or something, right? So the EVs are playing out in terms of where things really are going and the power of these platforms. So it's not just, the actual value of this in terms of media property, as well as what you can do on those platforms and where you can go is really, I think, quite exciting.
Yeah. And what would your advice be to businesses, big brands who are looking at this landscape thinking it's quite a saturated market with lots of content, as you say, to get eyeballs on to your particular brand? Do you have to be more risky? Do you have to stand out more in some ways?
So you have to be very, very clear on who you are. You have to have the ability to look at the different platforms and actually construct your brand and your content to actually work in those environments. You have to know how to use the personalities of people. It's like just knowing how to be a brilliant media publication today, not how was I a brilliant media publication yesterday.
And I want to come on to now the economic model and the changing economic model that underpins media that you mentioned earlier. Can you just talk more about where the model is been right now, or I guess in the last couple of years, and where you see it going in the future? You talked about the large language models as well, taking eyeballs away from traditional search engines. Where do you see that going?
That's probably the hottest space at the moment. So when you look at search, so SEO, search engine optimization, very quickly became generative engine optimization. It was like, oh yeah, GEO. It's like we've been talking about that forever. We haven't. It was brand new, like, new for 2024, whatever it is. And so that whole piece is to TBD. So how do I get my content or my brand for other industries found, and how do I stand my brand up to talk to LLMs, as well as to live inside of some of these other big platforms, to TikTok, YouTube, Discord, whichever it is. So what does that mean in terms of, is it a subscription model? Is it a pay per use license model? How does that work? Because again, like, people are used to going, you find my content, I pay for you to find my content. You click on it, I get paid. That's how I pay for the service, and then hopefully I get a really good conversion. So that whole thing needs to be completely rethought, and needs to stand up at scale, because you can't, and that's what's happening at the moment. That's why people are entering very different licensing agreements with the LLMs, and why people like Medium are leading on this really simple licensing model, which is, as you find my content, there's a standard to go, you cannot crawl this, or you can crawl it, but there's a payment per use, or you can only crawl this if you subscribe to a particular newsletter or whatever it is, and therefore you can find me that way.
So to put it crudely, is SEO a dying concept, and do you think we'll see adverts and the like on large language models?
So yes, it's a declining concept. Will there be room for it in the future? Probably for the next few years. As I say, it'll take time for something to move out. In terms of advertising on the LLMs, it's really interesting. So I think people are starting to build algorithms around conversational content. So actually writing for the LLMs, not writing content that is for humans, that the LLMs can just find. It's actually writing specifically for it. So there are some conventions that are emerging, but there is no set view on whether adverts will be inside. Unless something very different emerges, there is no choice because we have to find an economic model at scale. And brands' content will live inside those, not all of it, obviously, but it will live inside those big platforms. And they will have to find some fairness in terms of how that works. So I think so.
Well, I guess I presume if some businesses are writing their content for LLMs, at some stage everyone will be writing their content for LLMs, and then there's no
differentiation. We call it content slop in the industry, and there is a risk of that when everything is just optimized. And we saw that with search engine optimization, and the big searchers had to keep changing their algorithm for that, because you can game it, and when you can game something, then everyone can game it, and it becomes sort of like the baseline for quality reduces. But I would, I really believe things like TikTok, YouTube, and all of those platforms have got a huge role to play, because that's, in a strange way, it forces brands, it forces media to be more inventive and innovative with their brands.
Great. There is so much more we could discuss, but we're almost out of time. I'm going to end with the usual question that we end on, which is, if you have one piece of advice for business leaders right now looking to navigate this changing media landscape, what would it be?
So be very aware of the big shifts and follow them very carefully. But most importantly, be proactively innovative with how you are sort of modeling your business, because you'll need to model for many, many different scenarios, and waiting isn't really an option.
Great. Nat, thank you for joining the podcast. We'll end it there before the next media trend comes along and makes this podcast obsolete.
Hopefully not too soon.
No, indeed. Thank you very much for joining. However you consume your content, please do like and subscribe if you're enjoying the podcast. We will see you again for the Insight in 15.